The corporate secretary program was launched back in 2000. There were only 3 people, and none of them understood what a corporate secretary was. Well, a secretary, they thought it was someone who brings coffee.
Privatization gave a very strong push to the development of the corporate governance in Ukraine.
Sparks often fly between the management and the board when a board is created in the company. You don't have experience because no one hires you, and no one hires you because you don't have experience. We, as an association, select a board for a specific company. These people work for 6 months without compensation. The owner observes, and if there are results, then they stay on and continue working as a regular board. If you've decided to build a career as a corporate director, then it should be your sole occupation.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the channel, Boards of Directors with Sergiy Bulavin. Today we are at the office of the Corporate Governance Professional Association and the office of the Institute of Corporate Governance. And we are meeting with Oleksandr Okuniev. Oleksandr, good afternoon. For many professionals in Ukraine's corporate governance market, as well as for many company owners who are considering creating boards or have already established boards of directors, corporate governance is associated with the figure of Oleksandr Okuniev. Why is that? Because Oleksandr has made a very significant contribution to the development of corporate governance in Ukraine. He is a leading expert in this field. Moreover, he is willing to share his findings, knowledge, and experience with those who are interested in these matters in order to make the implementation and functioning of boards more effective. Oleksandr is the chairman of the board of directors of the Corporate Governance Professional Association, CGPA, and a member of the Council of the National Registry of Corporate Directors. He is also the author of a number of manuals, practical guidelines, and many publications related to corporate governance in Ukraine. Oleksandr, by the way, what's the correct way to say it? Is it corporate management or corporate governance?
Actually, the correct term, I think the more accurately reflects the essence, is the term corporate governance. Another issue is that it's not provided for by our Ukrainian legislator. If they use it, it's considered you're ignorant, like you don't know Ukrainian legislation. So ideally, we need to change all the post-Soviet terminology. Yes, it needs to be removed. And I think we also need to get rid of this management term here. Yes, of course, the correct term is corporate governance, but that's a huge task. We once discussed with colleagues the idea of changing a whole range of laws. It's not easy, though. It's a technical change. I think that understanding the essence will be easier.
If the term governance is used in the context of our conversation, we'll use corporate governance instead of corporate management. Let it be a lightly twitted Ukrainian legislation. We have come with a disclaimer. Okay, good. Oleksandr, you've spent a significant part of your life working on issues related to corporate governance. Could you briefly, in a couple of sentences, outline this professional mission?
When the Soviet Union collapsed, I probably started working in this field. I began with the management at a large factory where I headed the legal department. Then I moved into private business, working in a large private company, dealing with foreign economic activity. And then it so happened that I got a job at the International Finance Corporation. There was a major project related to privatization in Ukraine, mass privatization, meaning the transformation of state-owned companies into joint stock companies. That was from 1995? Yes, from 1995 till the end of 1999, 5 years. I was there. At first, it was a privatization project, and then after we had created all these joint stock companies, the issue arose that no one knew how to manage them. There were no specialists, no manuals, no methodologies, and no legislation. And so the question arose, what should be done about this somehow, to manage it somehow? And we had a large-scale project within the framework of the International Finance Corporation, which focused on corporate governance in Ukraine. And the first book on corporate governance in Ukraine was published by the IFC in 1999. I was a co-author on corporate governance in Ukraine. We are proud of that. And then I realized that it was time to start working within Ukrainian institutions. I joined the International Institute of Business, particularly the Center for Corporate Governance, which has many graduates. Later, we established an association.
Indeed, privatization gave a very strong impetus to the development of corporate governance in Ukraine. And in fact, it emerged in Ukraine thanks to privatization and the joint stock companies, shareholder theorists, who were emerging emerging at that time.
Now, maybe from our current perspective, it looks somewhat different. And I often hear complaints that privatization was unsuccessful and so on. At that time, it was necessary to quickly make a return of the commies impossible. And in many cities, only the signs changed, but nothing else. What was really needed was an economic foundation for political change to secure that. And this rapid privatization of large enterprises ensured what we have today, unlike, for example, Belarus, where all large enterprises are still state-owned. In Kazakhstan, most large enterprises are still state-owned. And there, it's quite easy to change the signs back, in my opinion. In Belarus, this actually happened. In Kazakhstan, a bit differently. So I think the privatization was successful, and after that, it became a stream. It was necessary to support this reform.
Were there, perhaps, any deviations from this path? Why? Because in 1995 and 96, in fact, the only companies and entities involved in corporate governance in Ukraine were those that had previously been state-owned. There was probably quite a narrow approach to this area because only one segment was covered by corporate governance. Did you ever thought that maybe there had been another way to take this path further?
I'll tell you, no, I didn't. Now that I think about it, I don't even have an answer as to why I didn't. Somehow I saw myself in this, and I never even considered that it could be otherwise, or maybe that I should change something, go somewhere else. And actually, at first, corporate governance was seen as governing large former state-owned companies. That's true. As for private companies, I actually suffered a lot from the fact that we didn't have clients from the private sector. People didn't seek consultations, didn't attend programs, and so on. But then I realized that the market just wasn't ready yet. I'm ready for this. And eventually, as they say, it took off. And now we have some kind of balance.
When did the idea to create the Institute of Corporate Governance and the Corporate Governance Professional Association come about? Which came first and which came second?
Of course, the idea to create an educational institution focused exclusively on corporate governance had always been there because there wasn't one. I worked extensively at a business school, the International Institute of Business. And within the institute, we created the Center for Corporate Governance. We somehow eventually grew from those very foundations, and we needed to reposition ourselves and develop in a different way. So the idea of creating something independent, like the Institute of Corporate Governance, was always there, and eventually we brought it to life. As for the association, honestly, there were no ideas at all. At the initial stage, I won't hide it, the same idea was to create an alumni club to support sales, to support our clients who had completed the training, but what comes next? Next, there needs to be an exchange of experience and so on. And honestly, I didn't even see it coming. It was an initiative from the alumni, of course I supported it, and then when it came to the question of who would lead it, they said, well, you will lead it. I said, no, this is kind of a different story. And during the process, they said, why a club? Let's make it a professional association. It was just a play on words. There was no real meaning behind it. I repeat, this was in 2009. Well, and then over the years, it turned out that we realized, yes, we actually did something right. It turns out we did the right thing and that we need to do something for this profession. So first came the Institute and then the association.
And the first educational program of the Institute, in what year was it launched?
Well, the corporate secretary program was launched back when we were still the Institute of Business, if I'm not mistaken, in the year 2000, almost in 2001. It was so long ago that, to be honest, I don't even remember exactly. There were only 3 people, and none of them understood what a corporate secretary was. Well, secretary, they thought of it as someone who brings coffee. Then, well, it was just us. We were the ones explaining to people. So the first program, yes, had 3 people, and 2 of them, I mean, yes, we stayed in touch for a very long time, and so they, I think, have successfully built their careers and risen to become members of supervisory boards. And since 2006, this program has been implemented to this day in cooperation with the State Property Fund. Together, and we are grateful to the fund for such long-term cooperation. Listen, for example, people who are not a family anymore, they divorce. And we, with various heads of the fund from different governments, from different times, through hardship and joy, together with the fund, and around 1,500 graduates have attended this program.
And what about the training program for corporate directors?
For directors, it's a more complex matter because, first of all, by definition, they are less accessible people. Secondly, they need content that satisfies them. And thirdly, again, there need to be supervisory boards. Many companies didn't have supervisory boards. Only those that were privatized did. Our program is probably the first of its kind. Around 2004-2005, we implemented it at the International Institute of Business. Only people, as I see them now, they were in leading roles back then and were our participants. Yes. Then for a while, there was no demand for this program. Back in 2010, we made our efforts to try to revive it once again. We ran the program a few more times, so it was episodic for us. And then I would say Corporate Director 2.0 has been with us since 2019, with the support of the International Finance Corporation and the British Embassy, as well as the American Center for International Private Enterprise, CIPE, all of them. We are grateful they revived this program, and since then it has been held regularly 2 to 3 programs per year. We run these as open programs, and I would say it enjoys great demand and respect. In the market, the number of participants keeps growing. Last time there were 57. We had quite a number of people. It's fair to say it has become popular with many participants from different places. Countries from Central Asia, from Europe, from Western Europe.
And of course, both Corporate Governance Professional Association and the Institute of Corporate Governance. Since their founding, they have gone through their own journey. That journey, among other things, was likely connected to influencing the development of this area of corporate governance, not only in terms of educating participants and experts in this market, but also through legislation, through the implementation of supervisory boards in state-owned companies.
Yes, we have many different discussions regarding our market, which has a demand for corporate governance. There are 3 growth points, that's well known. These are banks and financial companies where it's driven by legislation and regulatory requirements. They all have boards, they have all established corporate governance. Some form of corporate governance exists within their companies. Some are better, some are worse, but it exists, and there are people there who are interested in developing professionally. The second group is state-owned companies, also due to legislative requirements. They have established boards and implemented corporate governance. And third, perhaps the most interesting, are private companies, because our business owners have finally, as they say, matured. There are reasons for that, and I can talk about them later, why they have matured. They have matured to the point where they understand the need to build something institutional within their companies, and not manage them in a hands-on manual way, as they say, but to establish boards. And this is the most interesting part. I think this trend will continue. Well, unfortunately, the war and COVID. It slowed things down a bit, but I think everything is happening as it should.
Alexander, what is it today? What is the Corporate Governance Professional Association and the Institute of Corporate Governance today?
Well, look, I can speak for myself, for me, or whether I have. The Institute is really like my child. It's something I created. It's my business, actually, with a partner. The Institute focuses on educational programs in corporate governance and consulting projects. There are 3 programs, well, 3 flagship programs for members of supervisory boards. The Corporate Director Program for corporate directors. We have 2 levels of program for corporate secretaries and program for authorized anti-corruption officers. Essentially, it's a compliance program, anti-corruption compliance. These 3 programs are already well developed and in demand. They are like cash cows, if I may put it that way. In addition, there are various programs. In the corporate format, there are different situational programs. Some new legislation, something happening on consulting projects. Consulting projects are mostly, I think we'll talk more about them later, mostly related to board evaluations, board formation, selecting directors for boards, and advising them. That's the kind of work the Institute does. It's a private company, a limited liability company. It's my private company. As for the association, it's of course a public organization of corporate governance professionals. We have over 200 individual members and about 15 legal entities as corporate members. But these are huge companies, DTK companies of that scale, the railway and so on. In other words, they bring together a large number of people. The mission of the association is to protect the interests of corporate governance professionals, to help them grow, become better, and reach new heights in their careers.
Speaking of programs, Corporate Director, what is the main audience for this program?
First, it's business owners who either are considering establishing a board or have already done so and want to make sure that everything is moving in the right direction, that they are doing what needs to be done, that their board is functioning properly. That's regarding the owners. The second category is board members. Board members, of course, are interested in professional development. Of course, they want to connect with colleagues, exchange experiences, and hear something new. And third, there are managers, mostly top managers, who want to be on boards, who want to join boards, who are probably a bit tired of their top management careers and want to try something new. Well, it's really a question of where a director can grow. Well, perhaps to try themselves out as a member of a supervisory board.
I know that many owners, before introducing corporate governance boards into their companies, send their top managers to study at the Institute of Corporate Governance. How widespread is this?
Most of them, of course, don't go for training, but for consultation. They come to me and start asking questions. I can see that the questions just keep coming endlessly. So my advice is to go through a program like that, all together, and then if there are still questions left, we'll talk about them. Because after all, some background is necessary. We need to have a common ground to talk about. And this is truly advice for everyone watching us right now. Join the program, get some foundational knowledge. Of course, it's an entry point into the profession, and then we can start discussing specifics. Very often sparks fly between management and the board when board is created within a company. Often, either the management leaves or the board does. And first of all, you need to be aware of this. And secondly, the management, why does it perceive the board this way? Because what you don't clearly understand tends to scare you. And just in case, they distance themselves from the board and somehow oppose it. And that's actually a very good thing. And it seems to me, my experience shows, that if managers clearly understand the board's role, its authority, how it is supposed to collaborate with them, with top management, then it's not as frightening to them. And then they start building cooperation somehow. We have many examples where these sparks would start and then subside after internal corporate trainings involving board members and top managers. I would recommend doing such things, especially at the beginning of the board's work.
And how common is it, specifically corporate training, when specialists from the Institute of Corporate Governance are invited into the company in order to prepare and conduct a training focused specifically on that particular company?
Yes, it's common. Of course, it's beneficial for the company from every angle. First of all, this is the only way to train the maximum number of people. By the way, in that case, we don't count people individually. They pay. Just for the group, and that's it. But if you have to pay for each person and send them to our open trainings, it turns out to be quite expensive. So, of course, from a financial standpoint, yes. Secondly, from a physical and organizational standpoint, it really is possible to involve everyone. Thirdly, the training itself can be structured based on the company's needs, because some things might not be relevant for them, so there's no need to talk about those, but rather focus on others. It's necessary to discuss certain things in more detail, for example, in this company, using this company's reporting and so on.
Corporate Governance Professional Association and Institute hold annual events that everyone looks forward to. All market professionals and all program alumni. Corporate Director. It's a gathering of alumni of the Corporate Director Program and the annual Corporate Directors Forum, which are held even now during the war, and quite a lot of people attend.
In the summer of 2023, we had doubts about whether to hold it or not. Well, on the one hand, we need to meet, maintain connections. On the other hand, there's the war. It's not a proper time for events like these. Would it be appropriate or not? We asked our colleagues. They responded like this. Listen, it was summer on a Saturday. The weather was good and over 200 people showed up in the evening. It was a surprise for me. I realized that our work truly isn't in vain, and that people genuinely are drawn to these kinds of things. To one another and to the profession, yes. And since then, we've been holding them regularly.
Oleksandr, the Institute of Corporate Governance and the Corporate Governance Professional Association. They are also taking steps to promote the idea of implementing boards in private companies. There is a program currently being implemented by the Corporate Governance Professional Association called the Board Test Drive. Can you say a few words about this program?
They mentioned the Institute. Its mission is to educate and provide consulting. The association is a union of professionals. It's about sharing experience, networking, and communication. And, of course, offering various forms of support to its members. We saw the challenges that business owners face in having to make a choice. In order to create a board, you need to select the right people, and you have to bear significant costs for their compensation, and under conditions of uncertainty. It's unclear whether the board will be successful in this particular company, whether its working style will suit the owner, the top management, and so on. And if it doesn't suit them, then what? Then you have to part ways. That's painful. Reputationally, it's not very good. These are the kinds of challenges an owner faces. For people, we have many graduates from this director program, and they come up and say, listen, we've completed the training, Now we want to be members of a supervisory board, and we're applying somewhere, submitting applications, and they ask us, well, where have you served on a board before? And the answer is nowhere, and that's it. You don't have experience, so they don't take you because you don't have experience. And it becomes a closed loop. And this is the problem. They say, help us, create some kind of internship for us, give us some kind of practicum. Well, of course, we have to understand that these are experienced people, successful top managers. In other words, these are people, not beginners, but they are beginners as board members. They really do need help. We searched for a long time to find the right format. I think we found it. For 6 months, we, the association, select a board for a specific company if that company is interested in creating a board. 6 months. These people work without compensation. The owner observes if there are results, if the working format fits, if the people are a good match, if there's chemistry, then they stay on and continue working as a regular board. If not, then it's our responsibility to resolve the issue if the board hasn't proven itself. But I believe all the boards will prove themselves because we put a lot of effort into making this project successful. Right now, we are looking for companies that are interested. We already have a certain pool of companies, and we will continue selecting based on their needs. We have around 100 board members. There are already interested candidates among our graduates who want to join these boards without compensation, just to work and try themselves out as board members.
Well, and probably the owners might worry that some inexperienced board members will be participating. Most likely, along with newcomers, there will also be professionals with extensive experience.
Such concerns do exist, of course. One must understand the business owner, it's their business. But as you rightly said, first of all, the chair of such a board will always be an experienced director with extensive background, because these newcomers also need someone to learn from. They won't learn from each other. Of course, they will have such a mentor, the chair of the board. Secondly, we are the ones selecting the board members, and I want to appeal to the owners. Let them trust us. Let them place their trust in us. We are very interested in making these projects successful. We select good ones for them, good board members.
In addition to that, the association has created the Corporate Directors Solidarity Fund, which is focused on specific groups of our colleagues. This fund is operational. You can contribute on behalf of a corporate director. Donations can be made to this fund, and thanks to these donations, certain work is being done with groups affected by the war.
Well, this is essentially our response to what we can do during the war. Honestly, my observations show that these two communities, the business community and the military community, somehow exist in parallel. That is, there are people who are in the war, who are fighting, who have loved ones at the front, who are volunteers, who donate, a large group, a large army. And then there are people who, well, sort of pretend the war doesn't exist or try to live as if there were no war. And that, in our view, is not really a good thing. On the one hand, not everyone has to go to the front, but on the other hand, it's possible to help in your own way. Of course, you can contribute from where you are. And we started thinking about what we could do. In the Corporate Director Program, we decided to offer veterans and military personnel involved in business, of whom there are many, the opportunity to study at cost price. This is something the Institute can do. At the same time, there is the cost price, which also needs to be covered somehow. And so for this purpose, we created a fund, the Directors Solidarity Fund. So the idea is simple. You studied at the program, you gained knowledge, you enjoyed it, helped the military, helped those who lost their businesses in the occupied territories and so on, help those who want to study, who need it, by covering the costs of their education. And we already had such examples. The leaders of the Cartier Brigade, by the way, I should mention. So for the first time, we had such training funded by the Solidarity Fund, and they were satisfied with it. So here, you can get involved with the fund's work in two ways. First, indeed, you can donate to the fund. And second, if you are a military servant or have lost your business due to occupation and you're interested in going through such a program, well, reach out. The fund has money, and I think such an application can be considered and assistance provided.
Oleksandr, what advice could you give to potential or future corporate directors, that is, professionals, experts, perhaps top managers, CEOs of various companies, who are potentially considering advancing their careers in the direction of corporate governance?
First of all, I still believe, and I know some people will say, I know who's going to argue with me about this, but I still think that someone very young shouldn't be on a board. Objectively, boards are getting younger, and that's also true. If before it used to be after 60, now it's after 45. Still before 45, it's possible, but only in some exceptional case. So if I were a young person, I wouldn't rush to interrupt my top management career. I think you'll have time to be on boards, and you just need to reach the top as a top manager first. A person who hasn't reached the top in their career won't be very useful on a board either. So I wouldn't rush into joining boards. To young people, I would not recommend rushing into that too quickly. Of course, that's just a general recommendation. Secondly, I think that if you've decided to build a career as a corporate director, then that should be your only occupation, if you will, or at least your main occupation. You can't treat it as a public or civic duty. As some people think, I work here and then I also have this other thing. I think, yes, that doesn't work. You have to approach it professionally. It's important. And thirdly, I would still recommend to some people, I think it's wrong when a board member, gives advice off the top of their head. Of course, there are people of a very high level, and in certain cases, for certain companies, they can provide that. Sound advice straight from the top of their head, based on their experience, their understanding of the situation, their education, and so on. But that's more the exception, rather than the rule. In order to make high-quality decisions, such decisions must be preceded by serious, thorough preparatory work. You need to delve into the issues, study them, and constantly stay at the cutting edge of knowledge. And that's a really important point. And fourth, if we say that the board members are elderly people, we still shouldn't neglect the development of science and technology, because today changes are happening so rapidly and there's a lot written. By the way, I want to promote our library, because we have a great number of translated articles and materials from modern English language publications, and they all literally talk about how the role of boards is changing right now. Yes, well, some even say that artificial intelligence will replace them. Some say it won't replace them, but that board members need to adapt and somehow make use of this knowledge base and these opportunities. Yes, and it really is a kind of opportunity. So being open to challenges and responding to them is important.
Well, and probably to start a career, it wouldn't be a bad idea to go through some training or learn independently, watch materials, read specialized literature, or take courses. In Ukraine, there are 2 schools that offer specialized courses for corporate directors. The Institute of Corporate Governance is one of these schools. The programs of these schools differ and complement each other very well. I say this as a person who has completed both programs. They are truly very interesting. Probably, for those who want to learn more about the work at boards, I recommend to be in closer contact with other corporate directors. It makes sense to join the Corporate Governance Professional Association and take part in its events. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us on the channel Board of Directors with Sergiy Bulavin. In the next episode, Oleksandr and I will discuss issues related to corporate governance and the work of boards in Ukrainian companies. See you on the channel Board of Directors with Sergiy Bulavin.